On the cold, sharp morning of March 5th, 1931, the world stood on the precipice of the unthinkable. The United States, a nation that had once claimed the title of economic might, found itself staring into the abyss of its own financial ruin. The stock market crash of 1929 had shattered the fragile trust that had bound the nation's economy together. For months, the pain had been felt in every corner of the nation. Yet, it was not the market crash itself that would prove to be the most disastrous blow. It was the federal government's decision to continue borrowing on an unprecedented scale that would ensure the nation's collapse. In the years following that cataclysmic crash, America's leaders had pledged to lift the country from the dust and ashes. The New Deal emerged as a beacon of hope, promising to restore the country to its former glory. Yet, beneath the surface of government programs and federal spending lay a growing beast, the federal deficit. The more money the government printed to fund these recovery programs, the more the country edged toward financial oblivion. With each dollar spent, the United States became ever more entangled in a web of debt that it could not escape. It was the growing burden of borrowing that pushed America past its point of no return. But most Americans, immersed in the pain of their immediate suffering, couldn't see the long-term consequences. They couldn't see that the system, rife with leverage and borrowing, had crossed a line from which it could never return. What happened in 1931 was a stark warning to future generations. And here we are today, staring down the same path. This is where the modern empire stands. A country that has lived in the illusion of endless growth is now in the grip of a financial system just as fragile as it was in 1931. But this time, it's not a crash we're witnessing. It's a slow, suffocating collapse. The truth is, America's financial ruin is no longer a matter of if, but when. The debt burden, once unthinkable, has now reached levels that would have been inconceivable even a decade ago. The tipping point was crossed some time ago. In fact, many will argue it's already too late to reverse course. The system is too far gone, and the damage is done. And just as the Federal Reserve and politicians failed to recognize the full implications of their decisions back in the 1930s, they are failing again now. The debt has exploded beyond control. The mechanisms of financial collapse are already in place. It's just a matter of waiting for the trigger, the spark that will ignite the unraveling. But before we dive deeper into how we got here and where it's leading us, let me offer a simple statement of inevitability. We are too deep into this cycle of borrowing to turn back now. The path to financial collapse is as certain as the rising sun. You might be thinking that the economic experts will step in, that the government will find a way to stabilize the system. That's the comforting lie we've been told for decades. But the reality is far more unsettling. This isn't just an economic downturn. It isn't just another recession. It's a collapse of the financial system as we know it. Once a country becomes entangled in debt to the extent that America has, the only direction it can go is down. The only question left is, how quickly? I'm here to show you that everything you think you know about the stability of the US economy is a facade, one that's about to be shattered. What's coming is the end of an era, a slow-moving crisis that will break apart everything we know about finance, government, and even global power. We're witnessing a repeat of history, but with a more subtle, more insidious pattern. The question is not whether we'll collapse, but when the inevitable triggers will set off the chain reaction. I promise to explain everything that is unfolding before your eyes, and when the moment arrives, you'll realize that this wasn't a sudden catastrophe. No, this was the inevitable result of decisions made long before today. But there's a crucial piece of this puzzle that I won't reveal just yet. How we got here, and why this collapse feels so slow and unnoticeable, will come soon. For now, I'll leave you with this. The collapse of the US economy is no longer a matter of speculation. It is a certainty. The illusion of control is often at its strongest just before the collapse. This is the paradox at the heart of every major financial downfall. The system may appear solid, even thriving, but in reality, it is built on quicksand, held together only by the most fragile of agreements. We saw this during the roaring 1920s, just before the stock market crash that would devastate America. The Federal Reserve, the government, and Wall Street had convinced themselves that they could control the forces of financial leverage. They believed that constant borrowing and credit expansion could fuel endless growth. It was a dangerous belief, but It was embraced because it served the interests of the elite. Fast forward to today, and we see a very similar scenario unfolding. The US national debt is at a staggering $33 trillion and climbing. And yet, there is no real sense of alarm in the halls of power. The illusion is that the debt can be managed indefinitely. After all, the US dollar is still the global reserve currency, and the American economy is still the largest in the world. But beneath this surface of apparent strength, the system is cracking. The same patterns that led to the Great Depression are being replicated right now, but with more advanced financial instruments and a global network that masks the problem until it's too late. The rise of global trade and the international monetary system created a financial machine that appeared invincible. The US could borrow money from other countries, print more currency, and sustain a global empire without the same constraints that earlier nations had faced. In theory, this system would ensure that the American economy would never have to confront the limits of its borrowing. But that very system is now revealing its fatal flaw. The US is borrowing so much that the interest payments alone are becoming unsustainable. It is at this moment, when the illusion of limitless power is at its height, that the true nature of the system begins to show itself. The collapse doesn't come as a sudden blow. It arrives like the gradual sinking of a ship, where the crew continues to operate as if everything is normal, even as the hull begins to crack and water slowly floods the lower decks. The crisis is not in the moment of collapse itself, but in the realization that the system had been built on lies and delusion. This is where we are now. At the core of the financial system that has driven American prosperity for decades is an incredibly fragile mechanism: debt. Debt is the engine of this machine, and it runs on the promise that the future will be able to bear the weight of today's borrowing. It's a bet that future generations will pay for today's consumption, whether through higher taxes, inflation, or the continued willingness of foreign nations to buy US debt. But as the debt grows, this bet becomes more and more dangerous. Eventually, the system can no longer generate enough economic activity to meet its obligations, and the tipping point is reached. The machine begins to slow down, and the consequences of its unsustainable nature become inevitable. This illusion of power is reinforced by artificial support structures put in place by the government, much like the actions taken by the Federal Reserve and the government during the Great Depression to prop up banks and industries. Today's policymakers are doing everything they can to prevent the system from imploding. The Federal Reserve has used quantitative easing, buying government bonds to pump money into the economy, and the government continues to run large deficits, all in the name of stimulating growth. But this support is only temporary. It doesn't address the fundamental issue. The system is built on a foundation of debt that will eventually collapse under its own weight. The American public is being lulled into a false sense of security. We're told that the economy is resilient, that growth will continue, that the government's actions are stabilizing the economy. But what we are witnessing is not stability. It is a carefully constructed facade that hides the underlying cracks. These cracks are not visible to most people, but to those who understand the true nature of the financial system, the signs are unmistakable. The system is in denial. It is living in a fantasy where growth can continue indefinitely, where debt can be rolled over and paid off without consequence. But this is a lie, and the longer this illusion is allowed to persist, the more severe the consequences will be when the truth is finally exposed. What we are witnessing today is not a crisis of wealth, it's a crisis of power. The people at the top of the financial pyramid are in complete control of the system, or so they believe. But the system is beginning to fail. The debt burden is so large now that it's starting to restrict economic growth. The government's ability to respond with more borrowing is limited. The global financial system is also starting to show signs of strain as countries like China and Russia begin to de-dollarize and move away from the US currency. The entire global financial structure that has underpinned American power for decades is beginning to erode. The illusion of endless growth has been maintained for far too long, but now we are entering the critical stages of collapse. And it's not just the debt itself that will bring the system down. It is the combination of debt and the overconfidence of those in power that will prove to be the system's undoing. The government will continue to reassure the public, telling them that everything is under control, that the economy is just going through a rough patch. But this will be a lie, just as it was in 1929. The machine that once appeared indestructible will begin to grind to a halt. What we are witnessing today is the same cycle that has occurred throughout history. The illusion of strength just before collapse. The false belief that the system can be manipulated indefinitely. And the gradual realization that the debt burden is too great to sustain. The difference now is that the collapse will be more global, more intertwined, and more devastating than ever before. This is not just an American crisis, it is a global crisis. As we look ahead to 2025 and 2026, the warning signs are clear. The system is breaking. The question is not if it will collapse, but when. The cracks are appearing in the foundation, and soon it will be impossible to ignore them. The world will be forced to confront the reality of the situation. And when it does, it will be too late. As we look around today, it feels as though the collapse has already started. The signs are everywhere, but they are so subtle, so buried beneath layers of noise, that most people can't recognize them for what they are. The US economy, propped up by a seemingly endless amount of credit and debt, continues to churn forward. The government has continued to borrow and spend at unprecedented levels, while the Federal Reserve keeps the illusion alive with more money printing and interest rate manipulation. But there is a dangerous undercurrent beneath this surface, a sense of inevitability, of a moment when the system can no longer sustain itself, and that moment is fast approaching. It's important to understand that the trigger doesn't cause the collapse, it simply reveals it. The system has been in freefall for years, but the mechanisms of denial and temporary fixes have obscured the true extent of the damage. Whether the trigger is a financial shock, a political crisis, or an unforeseen event like a global trade war or a major geopolitical confrontation, it will act as the catalyst for the rapid unraveling of the system. But this is not the moment of collapse. This is the moment when everything that has been slowly decaying beneath the surface finally comes to light. Those who are prepared will weather the storm. They will have anticipated the inevitable and taken steps to protect their wealth, their assets, and their livelihoods. They will have diversified their investments, focused on real assets like gold or property, and taken steps to minimize their exposure to the collapsing financial system. But those who have denied the problem, who have continued to live in the illusion that everything is fine, will be the ones who suffer most when the collapse accelerates. The denial of the problem will prove to be the most costly mistake they ever made. It's easy to ignore the warning signs when everything seems to be going well. It's easy to tell yourself that the economy is resilient, that it will always bounce back, that the government will step in and fix things. But that's not how it works. This is a systemic problem, not a temporary blip. The US is now trapped in a debt cycle that it cannot escape. The government's options are limited. And as the debt burden continues to grow, the financial system will begin to buckle under its weight. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen. In the coming years, the world will start to feel the effects of this collapse. By 2025 and 2026, we will see the consequences unfold. Inflation will skyrocket, purchasing power will plummet, and the value of the dollar will begin to erode. The global financial system will begin to fray at the edges, as countries move away from the US dollar and start to question America's ability to maintain its economic dominance. The transition from a unipolar world to a multipolar one will become all the more apparent, and the US will be forced to confront the reality of its diminished role on the world stage. But even then, the true collapse will not be immediate. The process will unfold slowly, as people continue to deny what is happening. The economic indicators will be manipulated, the media will continue to paint an optimistic picture, and politicians will promise to fix the problems that have been years in the making. But none of these efforts will truly address the underlying issue. The system is broken, and it cannot be fixed by simple monetary policy or political expediency. As the system continues to unravel, it will expose the fragility of the global order. The international institutions that have upheld the dominance of the US dollar and the American economy will begin to lose their power. The global supply chains that have been built on American financial hegemony will begin to fracture. The entire structure that has allowed the US to live beyond its means for decades will come crashing down. But amidst this slow-motion collapse, there will still be time for action. Those who are prepared, those who understand the forces at play, will have a window of opportunity to secure their futures. The truth is, the warning signs are already there. If you are paying attention, you can see them. The key is to recognize them for what they are and take action before it's too late. And yet, for many, it will be too late. Denial is a powerful force, and the psychological toll of acknowledging that the system is on the brink of collapse will cause many to bury their heads in the sand. But those who choose to face the truth will be the ones who thrive in the chaos that follows. They will be the ones who adapt and weather the storm. The rest will be caught unprepared, and they will suffer the consequences of their denial. As the collapse unfolds, those who have denied reality will watch as the world they once knew begins to disintegrate. The signs will become impossible to ignore. The financial institutions that once seemed invincible will fail. The economy will falter, and the global order that the United States has dominated for so long will begin to crumble. The reality is that America's debt is now a ticking time bomb. The fuse is burning, and it's only a matter of time before the explosion occurs. But just like every other collapse in history, the signs were there long before the trigger was pulled. It's just that most people weren't paying attention. If you're reading this, you still have time to prepare, time to act. But it won't be long before the window of opportunity closes. When the collapse begins, it will be too late to do anything about it. So, I leave you with this final thought. The collapse is coming. The question is not if, but when. Those who are prepared will survive. Those who are not will be left behind. It's time to decide which side of history you want to be on.